everybody. Reporting to you again from the Glamour City, Hollywood.
We are still to see how the market will actually behave to cultivated meat. Cultivated meat is very different than plant-based in the sense that it's not an alternative. It's not an ingredient list. It's essentially the same product, the same meat that they're used to getting, just sourced differently. So we are yet to see how the consumer will behave to that. However, I do believe that both for plant-based as well as for cultivated meat, there is a maturation of the industry that we better understand what the consumer wants, what is important for them.
If you love listening to this show, please consider giving a rating and a review on Amazon Alexa or wherever you listen. We want to continue bringing you this amazing content, and part of our ability to do that means that we need a big audience. Now, it may not seem like much, but rating and reviewing the show will help more people find us, just like how you found this show. Simply on any podcast platform, search for a show, scroll down to the bottom, and push 5 stars. It's that easy. Thanks for supporting the show. Today, I'm joined by Ido Savir, CEO of SuperMeat. Welcome to the show today.
Thank you for having me.
So you've been involved in high-tech and biotech industries. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about your background.
Sure. So I've been a tech guy all my life. I'm a software engineer. I spent 20 years of my professional career doing that, all the way from the beginning of essentially the internet, transitioning from legacy systems to what we currently call the web or the internet. And then I was fortunate enough to be a part of a second revolution, which was mobile. So early 2000, we were all kind of struggling and grabbing about how mobile will be established, and no one really knew what was going to happen. And fortunately enough, I was a part of a group who identified that this was going to be a big thing, and we started preparing for it before it actually happened. And then we had the privilege of being part of that revolution and how it impacted everyone's life. And I've been very much ideologically driven, both for environmental reasons as well as animal welfare reasons for all of my life, doing different kind of activities and talks in universities and workplaces. And about 8 years ago, I stumbled upon the concept of cellular agriculture, what cultivated meat is part of. And that intrigued me a lot. It was a very compelling case, as it was both a combination of taking tech as well as creating a global impact in an area which was so important. So essentially that got me hooked, and I started a company.
Super. So can you tell us a little bit about SuperMeat?
Sure. So back then, I was actually, when I stumbled upon that cellular agriculture, I was involved in another startup in the software industry. And then at that time, there were no companies in the space yet. That was about 8 years ago, but there were kind of different talks about this area of cellular agriculture. A Dutch professor called Mark Post just did a first tasting of a burger. So that really caught everyone's eye. And I started supporting an NGO at that time, helping them in regards to the tech, which is my expertise, to try and understand what are the main challenges, how would we go around addressing them. And what I realized was that there was enough maturity that was available in terms of the technology that was out there, that we could get the business industry on board to really accelerate stuff. And once I realized that, I together with a few of my partners, I started SuperMeat. And our approach, myself being very kind of tech pragmatic oriented and not coming from the more academic side, was to try and see how we could connect the dots and leverage existing infrastructure and technology that was out there rather than introducing new concepts. And we thought that would have the most compelling case for the industry because it would allow them to really build on what they already have. So that's essentially the basis of what we are doing in SuperMeat.
Okay, so I'm going to come back to the years that you spent in this particular segment, but let's just help level set for those that are listening. And again, we've had culture meats experts and founders here before, but just for, again, depending who might be joining that may not be familiar with it, what is culture meat and how does it work?
Sure. So I hope that in 10 years from today, that won't be a question anymore. Everyone will know what cultured meat is about. But essentially what cultured meat is producing animal protein, animal meat, using animal cells rather than animals. So it's still sourced from animals, but instead of growing the entire animal, we're just growing the cells. And the way that we grow the meat from cells is using fermentation, the same way that we brew beer or yeast, Renner cheese, and there's so many examples in the food industry today. We are using the same type of technology to, for the first time, produce meat at scale at a very technological, industrial kind of setting.
Mm-hmm. And the thing is, and to your point, is that mainstream is still learning about cell-based. And for some consumers, they may have some misconception that culture meat or lab-grown cell meat is genetically engineered. Of course, that's not the case, but culture meat is fundamentally slaughter-free. Like you said, it's antibiotic-free and GMO-free. Can you talk about other ingredients that goes into the process, like binding agents or additives, that could have potential concern for consumers?
That's a great question. So like you said, Scott, the main kind of misconception around cultivated meat, because it's novel, is that it's GMO or synthetic or things of that sort. My friend Paul Shapiro, the CEO of a great company called Better Meat, has an interesting metaphor that he uses, or not metaphor, but kind of a throwback, where we were looking at ice as synthetic ice when it was first time produced in freezers, and people thought it as an unnatural thing. You shouldn't be producing synthetically ice. So I think similar to that, people will get more and more comfortable with this concept as this becomes very familiar and close to them. Now, the basic essence of cultivated meat production has nothing to do with GMO. We take the cells from the animal and we just provide them the environment that they need, and that means oxygen, that means nutrients, the food, the feed, and the warmth. So it's very similar to what we would want as part of a living environment. And that's something that we need to provide the cells because we are growing them outside of the animal's body. Now, the feed that we provide the cells is the equivalent of what animal feed is today. So it's composed of proteins, carbohydrates, fats, sugars, vitamins, and such. So it's, again, very fundamental to growing an organism. So I think what's important to understand, and once people have more and more conversation about this, is that we're actually taking animal agriculture to the next step, to the next level, but we're using the same fundamental building blocks that are the basis of current animal agriculture.
Mm-hmm. Now, one of the concerns that people have about chicken is salmonella, which of course isn't only limited to poultry, but at least in the minds of consumer, it's a big deal. How does the elimination of slaughtering live chicken remove the risk of contamination, including salmonella, while also increasing the shelf life?
Sure. So that's a great point in favor of cultivated meat or any industrial system. So one of the challenges of working in the current system, which is essentially many small units of production, which are the animals. In case of chickens, it's a very small unit of production, producing sometimes, I don't know, somewhere around 1.5 kilos, several pounds per unit. And obviously units malfunction and units needs to be operated. Wherein here you have one very large unit of production or several very large unit of productions which are very well monitored and supervised. And because of that, and because of another important attribute of this kind of industrial setting is the fact that it's a closed system. So the fact that it's a closed system means that there's no point of contamination. And when you compare that with animal agriculture, essentially you only have points of contamination everywhere. And the greatest point of contamination is the slaughter point. That's when essentially the main contamination event happens. And once you remove the slaughtering and you bring it into a completely closed system, you take out the contaminants, and as consequence of that, you also take out antibiotics. So that the essence of this process is essentially both antibiotic-free as well as contaminant-free.
Now, what's interesting is recently there's been some impact from the avian flu that has affected the poultry as well as the egg markets. How does the system that you're talking about effectively immune producers from these types of volatility?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So I think from my perspective as a tech guy, as someone who's always looked at technology mainly in the perspective of how we could use it to create a very large impact. So I think technology is really significant only at the point where you can scale it up and scale it out significantly. And I think that's one of the greatest advantages that cultivated meat brings. It doesn't matter what point we start from. Just the fact that we're transitioning to a completely technological system means that you can mitigate so many of these issues. And one attribute of that system is that it utilizes significantly less land, because it's like we mentioned earlier, what we're working on is essentially a centralized system compared with many different units of production, which require much more space. And because you have one centralized production system, you need much less people to operate it. And because it's a controlled system, it's a closed system, it's indoors, that means also you can mitigate, manage, monitor, and supervise the process and the people to a very high extent. And I think the most important part is you have no direct contact with the animal. So that contact happens essentially once. And that was as part of the establishment of the cell bank, which happens only once. And after that, continuously, you produce batches of meat from that cell bank. So there's literally no risk of zoonotic diseases because there's no exposure.
Now, of course, as consumers, all of us have gone and purchased chicken legs or thighs or breasts, let's say, and have seen variability in size, texture, quality. The process that you're talking about effectively controls for the quality of taste, the nutritional value, the profile, the functional behavior, and a lot of these core characteristics that you're talking about, and that consistency is really what we're talking about. Moreover, the other thing that really hasn't been brought up is, depending on the religion, is that you have issues around kosher and halal. Is that effectively goes away too, isn't it?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think you're touching about all the great benefits that come from this type, from introducing this kind of technology to animal agriculture. So I think what one core element in that respect is for the first time, you're actually controlling every aspect of that process. So when regards to kosher and halal, one of the main kind of challenges that they have is the ability to properly supervise this. And then all of a sudden you have here complete supervision that they're able to oversee every point in the process. And so we are actually in process with several authorities in terms of kosher and halal that are examining our process and would provide that certificate, that authorization. And that actually, they are extremely supportive of this. And the reason for that is actually it takes away much of the issues that they currently have, both with animal welfare, but also with different kind of practices that are very hard to control and supervise when it's in this standard animal agriculture setting. So this provides them many more tools to actually manage that process.
Now, of course, there are now quite a few well-established culture meat startups. Many of them are, frankly, years ahead in R&D and sitting on war chests of cash. What sets SuperMeat apart from its competitors, given the fact that the general process is pretty similar?
So there are actually a lot of differences in terms of the technology, both for SuperMeat and other companies. Each company is taking it a bit differently. So there are actually a lot of differences in that respect. But I would say two things. First of all, we are now going to be witnessing the first wave of companies who will introduce products to the market, mainly in the US and Singapore. These are the first active markets regulatory-wise that are expected to have regulatory frameworks. But not only that, is that when you look at that kind of first wave, that first wave is pretty small. We're talking about maybe 10, 15 companies globally. So, and we're privileged to be a part of that first wave of companies, and we'll be introducing the first products to the market at the end of 2024, early 2025. Now, when looking at cultivated meat production, the way we see it, what we were aiming to provide is meat as meat currently is in animal agriculture. So the meat that we're producing is composed of both connective tissue, muscle, fat. Essentially, you get everything that you would get with conventionally produced meat, and we're growing it in a very similar process. So we're not growing, some companies are growing the cells in different processes, wherein we are actually growing the entire meat cut in one process. And one testimony to that was that we released our nutritional profile, which was equivalent to the traditional animal counterpart, and that's our approach to be providing and producing in a very standard and familiar way, and producing the same kind of ingredient that both the consumer as well as the companies, the food companies, are accustomed to working with.
What's interesting is that depending on who we speak with, there's a lot of nuances. Some are creating more process, like meatballs, or in your case, more of a chicken patty that's essentially grinded almost, right? Whereas others are actually trying to go to replicating the actual meat in terms of the flow and the texture of the tissues, and scaffolding and all those kind of nuances gets fairly complex. Moreover, there are other startups that are utilizing plant-based protein in addition to culture meat because they want a certain taste, texture, and mouthfeel characteristics. What's SuperMeat's position on this?
So I think that as an industry and as the industry matures, there are going to be multiple products, from products that incorporate plant-based ingredients to products which are 100%, products which are minced, and products which are whole cut. This is, if you look, one of the kind of the concepts that many times is mentioned in relating to cultivated meat is hybrid products, which essentially means you've got cultivated meat, and then you've got some plant-based ingredient. Well, when you look at the conventional meat industry, food industry today, you've got so many products, and large portion of the current traditional industry has hybrid products. They're not considered hybrid because if you put some corn or wheat or soy, or if you bread the burger, the meat industry or the consumer doesn't regard that as a hybrid product. It's just a product that contains several ingredients. So similar to that, this is what's going to happen with the cultivated meat industry. The cultivated meat industry has an additional incentive for this kind of integrating additional ingredients is because of the cost of the cultivated meat initially, which will go down as we scale up. And so there are more incentives to bring forward more products that have plant-based or fungi-based kind of ingredients and not only cultivated meat. Our approach is essentially both. So we would have both products which will be just cultivated meat and products that would be incorporating also plant-based or minced products. So we are, and I think that's one of the greatest advantages that we bring to the table. We're producing 100% cultivated meat. We're not using scaffoldings. We're not using any kind of foreign material except for animal meat. And because of that, the companies that we work with can actually produce the same kind of products and application that they're already used to producing. And some of these are completely 100% meat, and some of them are some sort of combination of.
All right, so we only have about a minute left. We have seen a couple of things. One is there's been a hype cycle when it comes to food tech and ad tech, and that has certainly come down quite a bit. But also there's been market softening factors like inflation, higher interest rates, and for some, even layoffs. So consumers are shying away from plant-based meat substitutes and culture foods. And I think you were referring to FDA approval Upside Foods previously. So they're opting for cheaper, good old slaughter meats. How do you handle consumer adoption in this context?
Well, I think this is a great question. This is the question that we're, as an industry, is going to address in the next couple of years. So cultivated meat hasn't hit the market yet. So what we are still to see how the market will actually behave to cultivated meat. Cultivated meat is very different than plant-based in the sense that it's not an alternative. It's not an ingredient list. It's essentially the same product, the same meat that they're used to getting, just sourced differently. So we are yet to see how the consumer will behave to that. However, I do believe that both for plant-based as well as for cultivated meat, there is a maturation of the industry that we better understand what the consumer wants, what is important for them, and obviously price is part of that, and we provide it to them. And I think what we have seen is that the consumer is hungry for alternatives to the conventional meat production today, and that they're interested to expanding their portfolio on their dinner table, and that the food industry its responsibility is to find the products that hold up to the standards of today's consumers, which rise every day. So the consumer today is very aware and very understanding of what he actually puts on his plate. And I think it raises the bar, and I think it's a good thing. We had the first and second generation of plant-based, and we're going to have the first generation of cultivated meat. And all of these together are here to help mitigate the very large risk that we currently have, which is with the current meat industry to meet the demand of the market while sustaining the ecological footprint that that comes with this process.
Today, I've been joined by Ido Savir, CEO of SuperMeat. Thanks for joining today.
Thank you, Scott. It was a pleasure.
If you've enjoyed this episode, take a moment to rate our show on any podcast platform that you listen to. Scroll down to the bottom and push 5 stars. It's that easy. And as always, thanks for listening.